Give your sister the check or you are dead to us." My mother's voice didn't tremble. It cut through the sterile air of my kitchen like a butcher's blade. She wasn't there to congratulate me on the $125,000 whistleblower payout sitting on my granite counter. She wasn't there to ask how I'd survived 3 years of corporate warfare. She was there to gut me. My sister, Sarah, stood beside her, shivering with a frantic feral energy, her eyes fixed on that slip of paper as if it were a life jacket in a blood-red sea. Sarah had an audit at 8 a.m. Monday morning, and she currently had a felony-sized, 6-figure hole in her company's payroll account. They hadn't come to celebrate my survival, they had come to liquidate my soul to save their golden child. As I looked at my mother's hands, the same hands that had systematically shredded my credit score before I was even old enough to vote, I realized with a cold, terrifying clarity that I was never a daughter to these people. I was a high-yield insurance policy they were finally ready to cash in. But they forgot one thing: my job is to calculate risk. And I had already calculated that their entire world was about to fall. My name is Amelia, and I am a Senior Risk Analyst for a top-tier private equity firm. In my world, companies pay me a staggering amount of money to walk into a room, look at a disaster waiting to happen, and predict the exact millisecond the structure will fail. I look for the microscopic cracks in the foundation. I hunt for the liabilities that people try to bury in the fine print of their lives. And sitting there in my own living room, watching the 3 people who were supposed to love me plot my financial execution, I realized I had been ignoring the single biggest liability in my life for 29 years. My family was a sinking ship, and they were trying to use my body as a life raft. To understand why I didn't just scream and throw them out into the rain immediately, you have to understand the predatory biology of the Miller family. I've always called it the parasitic symbiosis theory. In nature, certain organisms are incapable of generating their own life force. They require a host to drain. In our house, Sarah was the host, the beautiful, shimmering face the world was supposed to admire. She was the one who was going to be the success story. She was the one who was going to marry into a dynasty and put the Miller name on a billboard. My parents, Eleanor and George, were the immune system. Their entire existence was dedicated to fighting off any reality, any consequence, or any person who might make Sarah uncomfortable or hold her accountable. And me? I was the liver. My only purpose in the family organism was to filter out the toxins so the rest of the body didn't get sick. I was designed from birth to absorb the poison, to take the hits, and to process the failures so Sarah could stay pretty and perfect. They didn't see themselves as evil. That is the most haunting part of the memory. They genuinely believed that sacrificing my happiness to save her was a biological necessity. To them, it wasn't cruelty, it was maintenance. I remembered the exact moment I truly grasped this dynamic, though I didn't have the professional vocabulary for it back then. It was 11 years ago. I was 18. I had just walked to the mailbox in our suburban driveway, my hands shaking as I held a thick, heavy envelope from a prestigious Ivy League university. I had opened it right there on the porch, my breath hitching as I read the words, "Accepted." Not only had I gotten into my dream school, but I had secured a partial academic scholarship that would cover 60% of the costs. It was the proudest, most electric moment of my life. I thought for the first time, I would be the one they looked at with pride. I burst into the kitchen, beaming, ready to finally hear my father say he was proud of me. But before I could speak, I saw the cake on the table. It was a massive 3-tier monstrosity with "Congratulations, Sarah" written in shimmering pink icing. Sarah had just been accepted into a local, unaccredited modeling academy, a 6-week finishing course that cost more than my entire first year of Ivy League tuition. My father didn't hug me. He didn't even look up from his coffee. He took my acceptance letter, skimmed it with a heavy, performative sigh, and set it down next to a stack of dirty breakfast dishes. He told me that we had to be realistic. He said they couldn't afford to send me halfway across the country. He explained, with the coldness of a debt collector, that family resources had to go where the highest return on investment was. 2 days later, a brand new, pearl-white BMW convertible sat in our driveway. It had tan leather seats and a bow on the hood. My mother told me it was a business necessity for Sarah's image. She said Sarah couldn't show up to high-end auditions in a beat-up sedan because appearances are everything. That car cost $45,000. That was my college fund. That was the money I had earned working 3 jobs every summer since I was 14, mixed with the inheritance my grandmother had specifically left for my education. They liquidated my entire future to buy my sister a prop for her vanity. I didn't go to the Ivy League. I went to a local state school 40 minutes away, commuting in a rusted-out truck that barely started in the winter. I worked the graveyard shift at a shipping warehouse, loading heavy crates until my spine felt like it was made of jagged glass, just to pay for my textbooks and gas. I graduated with honors, a permanent back injury, and a soul made of tempered steel. Sarah crashed that BMW 3 months later while driving under the influence. She walked away without a scratch, and my father just dipped into his retirement to buy her another one. They broke me back then. They taught me that my dreams were just convertible currency for Sarah's whims. But looking at them now, a decade later, I realized the power dynamic had finally shifted. The liver was tired of filtering the poison. Sarah wasn't a rising star anymore. She was a 32-year-old fraud with a failing boutique startup and a felony embezzlement charge hanging over her head. And I wasn't that 18-year-old girl crying over a discarded letter. I was a professional who knew exactly where the bodies were buried because I was the one they had forced to dig the graves. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek, a perfect, practiced motion she probably learned at that modeling academy. She told me she just needed a bridge loan. She promised, with a straight face, that she would pay me back tenfold after her next round of venture funding. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie because, as a risk analyst, I had pulled her comprehensive credit report and business filings an hour before they arrived. She was maxed out. She was drowning in high-interest debt, and she wanted to stand on my head just to catch one more breath. I looked at my father. He was tapping his foot, impatient, waiting for me to play my role and filter this problem away. He thought he was looking at the same daughter he had bullied for 30 years. He didn't realize he was looking at a woman who had just decided to liquidate the family liability. I let my shoulders slump. I performed a calculated physical collapse, adopting the exact posture of the defeated, good girl daughter they were used to seeing. I put my head in my hands and let out a long, shaky breath. I needed them to believe I was breaking, not plotting. Okay, I whispered into my palms. Okay, I'll do it. I can't let you go to prison, Sarah. It would kill Dad. The tension in the room snapped like a cut wire. My mother let out a theatrical sigh of relief, practically deflating. My father leaned back, his face settling into that smug, self-satisfied expression of a man who had successfully disciplined a rebellious employee. Sarah stopped her frantic pacing and looked at me with wet, grateful eyes. But we have a major technical problem, I said, my voice rising in a fake panic. I stood up and grabbed my laptop, flipping it open. I can't just wire $125,000 to your personal account tonight. The banking algorithms for a whistleblower bounty are flagged for anti-money laundering. If I send a lump sum that size to a personal account, the IRS will freeze both our accounts for a 90-day review. You'll miss your audit deadline on Monday. You'll be in handcuffs before the funds even clear. Sarah's face went pale. What? No. There has to be a way. I can fix it, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a purpose they didn't understand. But we have to document it with surgical precision. If I send this as a personal loan, federal law requires me to charge you a minimum market interest rate. If I don't, the IRS classifies it as a gift, and we both get hit with a 40% gift tax. That's $50,000 of the payout gone instantly to the government. My father stood up, his face reddening. We are not giving $50,000 to the taxman. Figure it out, Amelia. There is one loophole, I said, turning the screen slightly away from them so they couldn't see my hands. They weren't shaking from fear, they were vibrating from adrenaline. If we classify this payment as third-party restitution for accounting discrepancies, it's tax-exempt. Basically, I'm not loaning you money. I'm covering a debt you owe to your company to correct an error. I looked at Sarah. But for that to work, you have to admit the error in writing. You have to verify that the withdrawal from your company was, let's call it, inadvertent. If you sign a statement saying you took the money by mistake and this is a formal correction, the IRS treats it as a non-event. No tax, no interest. It was the oldest trick in the Risk Analyst handbook: appeal to a criminal's greed and they will completely ignore their survival instinct. Sarah didn't see a confession. She saw a way to save $50,000. I opened a legal document software. I drafted a simple, one-page affidavit. It looked boring. It looked like standard, soul-crushing tax compliance paperwork. But in the center of the page, under the section labeled Reason for Disbursement, I left a blank, editable text box. I emailed the link to her phone. "Okay," I said, my voice tight. "Just fill in the reason field. Make sure you use the words inadvertent withdrawal, so it looks like an accident, not theft. Then sign it. I'll handle the rest." Sarah's phone pinged. She opened the email. She didn't hesitate. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't even read the fine print at the top of the page. She tapped the screen, her thumbs flying over the keyboard. She was so focused on avoiding the tax bill that she didn't realize she was building her own gallows. She typed, "Repayment of inadvertent withdrawal of company payroll funds to avoid audit discrepancy." She pressed sign. A moment later, my laptop chimed. Document completed. I opened the PDF. There it was, her digital signature, timestamped, IP-tracked, and legally binding under penalty of perjury. She had just confessed to felony embezzlement. She had admitted she took the money, admitted it was company funds, and admitted she was trying to hide it. "It's done," Sarah said, looking up at me with a smirk. "Now, transfer the money. I want to see the confirmation." "I need about an hour for the funds to clear the secondary holding account," I lied, closing my laptop. "Go home. Get some sleep. I'll wire it first thing in the morning so it hits your account by the time the auditors arrive." They left 5 minutes later. My mother actually hugged me on her way out, whispering that I was a good girl, and that she knew I'd do the right thing for the family. They walked out into the pouring rain, convinced they had won, convinced they had successfully drained the host one last time. I locked the door, slid the heavy deadbolt home, and leaned my back against the wood. I didn't send the money. I didn't even look at the banking app. Instead, I saved the PDF to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers and sent a copy to my private attorney. I had the bait. Now, I needed to close the trap. I sat in the cold glow of my computer, the adrenaline from the DocuSign trap fading into a hard crystalline focus. I had the confession, but I needed to see the full extent of the rot. I logged into the major credit bureaus. I usually checked my score once a year, but I had never done a deep dive into the authorized user history. I scrolled past my own legitimate loans, and then I stopped. There they were. 3 high-limit credit cards I had never opened, never seen, and never touched. One opened when I was 19, another at 22, and the last one just 6 months ago. The total balance was $45,000. My parents hadn't just stolen my college fund, they had been wearing my identity like a stolen coat for a decade. They had added themselves as authorized users to accounts opened in my name, intercepted the billing mail, and lived a lifestyle they couldn't afford on the back of my future. Every vacation, every designer bag for Sarah, every nice dinner they'd used to brag about their success, I had paid for all of it. They weren't just parasites, they were identity thieves. I printed every single statement. I added them to the digital kill file. And then, the room was suddenly flooded with strobing blue and red flashes. I looked out the window. 2 police cruisers were screeching to a halt at my curb. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "We're doing this for your own good, Amelia. You're clearly having a breakdown." They weren't waiting for the money anymore. They were going for the nuclear option, an involuntary psychiatric hold. They knew that if they could get the police to drag me out of my house in handcuffs, looking unstable, they could file for emergency conservatorship by morning. They could seize my accounts, including the whistleblower payout, under the guise of managing my assets, while I was locked away. It was the ultimate gaslight. They expected me to be the hysterical daughter. They expected me to open the door crying and screaming about betrayal, which would only prove their point to the officers. I didn't panic. I initiated what I call the contrast protocol. I ran to my closet. I threw on my sharpest navy blue blazer. I put on my glasses. I adjusted my professional wireless headset. I opened my laptop and started a dummy Zoom meeting, maximizing a complex financial spreadsheet so the green and red numbers reflected in the lenses of my glasses. I grabbed a leather clipboard just as the pounding started on my door. Police. Open up. I didn't run to the door. I walked. I opened it mid-sentence, speaking into my headset. Listen, the risk mitigation coefficients for the Q3 audit are off. We need to restructure the debt before the Tokyo markets open. Hold on, I have a distraction at the door. I looked at the two officers standing there, hands hovering over their holsters, ready to tackle a maniac. I tapped my headset, looking annoyed but perfectly composed. Officers, can I help you? I am in the middle of a high-stakes conference call with our international partners. The officers froze. They looked at me, a calm, professional woman in a blazer, discussing global finance. Then they looked over their shoulders at the driveway. My mother was there, sobbing theatrically into my father's shoulder. Sarah was screaming that I had a weapon and was going to hurt myself. The contrast was violent. Inside the house, a composed, high-earning professional. Outside, a chaotic, screaming circus of people making wild accusations. "Ma'am," the older officer said, his hand moving away from his belt. "We received a 911 call about a suicidal individual with a weapon." A weapon? I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Officer, the only weapon I have in this house is a quarterly earnings report. My family is currently struggling with a massive financial crisis of their own making. I refuse to grant them a six-figure loan tonight, and I assume this is their very dramatic retaliation. I'm happy to let you step inside and see that I am perfectly fine, but I really must get back to this call." I stepped back, showing them my immaculate, quiet apartment. My tea was still steaming on the table. The officers looked back at my parents, who were now yelling at the neighbors to get back inside. The lead officer shook his head and closed his notepad. "I apologize for the disturbance, ma'am. We'll clear this as a false report. We've seen this kind of family dispute before." "Thank you, officer," I said politely. "Could you please ask them to vacate my property? They are interfering with my work." I watched from the window as the police spoke to my parents. I saw my father's face turn a bruised shade of purple. I saw Sarah stomp her foot like a toddler. They were told to leave or face immediate arrest for misuse of emergency services. They drove away, defeated and seething. I closed the blinds and sat down. My hands were finally steady. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had saved 3 years ago. "Mr. Vance," I said when the line picked up. "It's Amelia. The contrast protocol worked. We're ready for the final phase." "Good," Vance said, his voice sounding like gravel and expensive suits. "Are you sure you want to go through with the foreclosure?" "I'm sure. File the deed." 2 days later, I stepped into the lobby of Vance and Associates on the 45th floor of a downtown glass tower. The air was freezing, the floors were white marble, and my heels clicked against the stone like a countdown. My family had demanded this meeting. After the police debacle, they had hired a strip mall attorney to file an emergency petition, claiming I was a danger to myself to get control of my money. Mr. Vance had intervened, blocked the hearing, and forced them into binding private arbitration to settle matters discreetly. They thought discreetly meant I was going to surrender and sign over the check. They didn't realize they were walking into a kill box. I opened the heavy oak door to a soundproof conference room. They were already there. My father sat at the head of the table, looking smug. My mother had her concerned mask on. Sarah looked polished, but her leg was bouncing under the table. She knew she was 48 hours away from an audit that would end her life. "Where is the check, Amelia?" my father demanded as soon as I sat down. "We've had enough of your games." "We aren't here for a check," I said, placing a single, thin file folder on the mahogany table. "We're here to correct the record." Sarah snapped that I was unstable, and that I tricked her. My mother started crying about how they only wanted to protect me. Mr. Vance cleared his throat, pointing to the court reporter in the corner. "Everything said in this room is under oath and on the record. Proceed." They didn't flinch. They spent the next 20 minutes lying. Sarah swore she needed the money for business expansion. My father swore I was delusional. The stenographer etched every single lie into the permanent record. Perjury, exactly as I had planned. When they finished, Mr. Vance pressed a button. The projector lit up the wall with Exhibit A, Sarah's signed DocuSign affidavit. "Miss Miller," Vance said mildly, "why did you just testify that these funds were for business expansion, when you signed a sworn affidavit 48 hours ago stating they were to repay inadvertent embezzlement to avoid an audit?" The color drained from Sarah's face so fast I thought she might faint. She started to stammer, trying to blame me, but Vance moved to Exhibit B, the 10-year timeline of identity theft. $45,000 in unauthorized debt, Vance said, his voice echoing. Federal identity theft. Wire fraud. Mail fraud. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on the last 5 years of these charges, Eleanor. Would you like to explain these signatures? My mother let out a tiny squeak and gripped my father's arm. My father stood up, shouting that they had raised me and were entitled to be compensated for their sacrifice. "You are entitled to nothing," I said, standing up. "And now for the final piece. Exhibit C." Vance clicked the remote. A deed appeared on the screen. A tax lien deed. My father squinted at the screen. "That's my house. What are you doing with a picture of my house?" "Look at the owner, George," I said. EC Holdings LLC. "I bought the tax debt on your house 3 years ago through a shell company. I paid the back taxes you ignored to fund Sarah's life, and I waited. The 3-year statutory redemption period expired at midnight. I didn't pay your mortgage, Dad. I foreclosed on the lien. I own the roof over your heads. You're currently trespassing on my property." The screaming started then. My father lunged across the table. Sarah tried to grab my laptop. My mother wailed about family loyalty. Mr. Vance roared for them to sit down, and for the first time in my life, they obeyed. They sat there, small and terrified, as Vance slid a final document across the table. "This is a confession of judgment and a voluntary permanent restraining order," I said. "You admit to the identity theft debt. You vacate my house within 7 days. You never contact me again. If you come within 500 feet of me or my workplace, you go to jail. If you don't sign, I email Exhibit A to the district attorney and Exhibit B to the FBI. You'll be arrested before you reach the elevator." My father searched my face for the daughter he used to bully. She wasn't there. His hand shook as he signed. My mother followed, weeping silently. Sarah signed last, her eyes dead as her future dissolved into ink. I took the folder, stood up, and walked out of that room. I breathed the city air like it was the first real oxygen I'd had in 29 years. I blocked their numbers before I even reached my car. The aftermath was swift. Sarah was fired the next morning after I anonymously forwarded her signed confession to her board of directors. She became unhireable in the industry. My parents moved into a cramped rental 2 towns over. I sold their house 3 months later, and the profit paid off the debt they had stolen in my name. I'm alone now, but I'm not lonely. I wake up in a home I own, with credit that is mine, and a life that no one can liquidate. Have you ever had to become the villain in their story just to survive in yours? Tell me in the comments. And if you're listening from somewhere you feel stuck, tell me what time it is there. I want to see how far this story travels.